What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another highly combustible reaction. We're going to be jumping into something kind of cool. Rembrandt, the real Rembrandt, a complete documentary coming at us via donation from Halloween. Much love. I do appreciate it. Let's learn a thing or two. We're going to cut it up into two parts. So today will be part one, tomorrow will be part two. Let's roll through part one.
Some people consider this one of the most beautiful paintings in the world. Titus, painted by his father, Rembrandt van Rijn. The longer you look at it, the more intriguing it becomes. It's on display in a museum in London, which used to have 12 Rembrandt paintings. Used to have, because this Titus is the only authentic Rembrandt left there.
How many are there in the world, though? Like, how many left total authentic Rembrandts? They said that's the only one left there. Did they go to personal people, or were they just on loan?
The 11 others are still there, but they've been written off not by Rembrandt. The last 5 perished in 1987. This impressive collection, which once served as a model for many an art collection the world over, is a classic example.
He said the last perished? What do you mean perished? Where'd they go?
Others are still there, but they've been written off not by Rembrandt.
Oh, okay.
The last 5 perished in 1987. This impressive collection, which once served as a model for many an art collection the world over, is a classic example of what can happen to owners of works by Rembrandt.
There was a certain amount of shock. There was a certain amount of horror, because Rembrandt is rather more than an artist. He's almost, he's a godlike figure. He's an icon. And if you interfere with his work and interfere with his reputation, you're interfering with the very nature of art, it appears.
Whoa.
Little did one suspect that Rembrandt, once inviolable, would become the center of public dispute.
It's kind of crazy that they would have had paintings there on display for so long before they were finally written off as not original Rembrandts. That's hardcore. Like,
art historians are being beleaguered by private detectives. In the press, new revelations are being compared to Watergate or the power of the atom bomb. When the now world-famous The Man with the Golden Helmet was acquired in Berlin in 1897, an art critic praised its amazing technical bravura. We now know the canvas was not a Rembrandt, thanks to research carried out in New York, Berlin, in London or Amsterdam.
it may not have been a Rembrandt, but damn, it was still good. Look at just the detail in these paintings. It makes no sense to me how someone can picture that in their head and then put it onto paper and it be the same thing that you picture. Like, it's nuts. It even seems to have like texture.
Research carried out in New York, Berlin, in London or Amsterdam. What's real and what isn't?
Yeah.
This is not a new issue. The Hague, the 8th of April, 1647. A correction was made on page 24 of the item list at a public auction. The word principle, indicating that it's a real Rembrandt, has been replaced by after Rembrandt. So even then, there was confusion with one expert who was mistaken or misled. We want to avoid mistakes and deceit. We want to come as close as possible to the real Rembrandt. Now, what's so special about the paintings which are solemnly revered, more often than not by tourists, in all the international temples of art?
Nachtwacht is een groepsportret. Een groepsportret van schutters. Een schutter, en het zit eigenlijk al in het woord, beschutter, moet een stad beschermen. En ik moet u vertellen, een compagnie bestaat ongeveer uit 200
In that
mensen.
procession was this man, Rodrick King. He was a very successful merchant and a member of the Amsterdam
Und es ist einer der berühmtesten Prediger seiner Zeit.
Dit schilderij is gecomponeerd door middel van licht en donker.
We've got a painting that looks rather like the famous night watch in Amsterdam, but it's a
Die houdt
night
zijn geweer schuin naar boven gericht.
Das Gesicht der
En
Frau
het geweer
ist
komt
der
tot ontlading.
Endpunkt der programmatischen Aussage des Bildes. Die
This
Aufgabe des
painting also
Predigers,
provides
das
Rembrandt with
Bibelwort
a splendid
durch
opportunity
das
to
Licht
try to match himself against the great works representing great men by artists.
Rembrandt was always ranked among great masters. In 1658, the German art dealer Gabriel Busselinus noted all Europe's major artists. Against one, he wrote Nostri Aetatis Miraculum, the miracle of our century. It was Rembrandt. Rembrandt's contemporaries must have been overwhelmed by his directness, by his...
It's just amazing how they can even capture the emotions on people's face. Make people look scared, make people look in love, make people look this way or that way. Like, it's just the whole art of painting. Anybody out there that's a painter with any kind of skill that you can do people and eyes and things like, seriously, you got my respect, because I don't know how it works. I don't know how that coordination from your brain to your hand works. Mine doesn't work like that. I can't even draw you a stick figure that looks good. Like, and my handwriting is shit. Everything about what I do with a pen or a pencil or a paintbrush is garbage. Like, I can do some things with Photoshop. I could restore photos, things like that. But when you start getting into the actual like art, non-digital, out of my realm completely, out of my fathoming, like, I really don't understand how. It doesn't make sense to me. But man, you managed to do it. You managed to layer up the paints in a certain way, and it's just painting. I've never really, when I was young, thought of it like that. I never really thought about what all went into a painting. You just look and say, okay, there's a pretty painting. You don't think about the countless hours and thought and possible changes that painting underwent before it came to you. It's very, very cool that we're getting to learn a lot of this stuff. Gives you a whole new respect for art, that's for sure.
Unrivaled intensity. His work imparts to the viewer an exciting, compelling logic which has been expressed in paint in an amazingly skillful fashion. Rembrandt already displayed an emotional intensity in his early years. This becomes clear when we compare one of his works with that of an older colleague. Take, for example, Abraham about to sacrifice his son Isaac, but is prevented from doing so by an angel. This woodcut, after a work by Rubens from 1614, inspired Rembrandt's teacher, Peter Lastman, to make this painting. It is, let us say, an adequate illustration of this grim event. However, on close scrutiny, we see that the hands of the angel, white against a light background, are barely visible. But he has come to foil an attempt on a child's life. Both father and son look theatrically sad, but they lack genuine expression.
Well, we knew that, like, even when you read the story of Abraham and Isaac, like, you can tell, obviously he didn't want to. Obviously, it's not something that he was excited about doing. It was just something that he knew that he had to do. He had no idea that the angels would intervene. He just knew that he was doing what he was told. Like, but it was a horrible act.
Is the work of the apprentice, Rembrandt. The imploring gesture of the angel's hand, which stands out against a dark background. the heart-rending expression of the father's face.
He looks relieved. Look. Like, thank you for stopping me.
The heart-rending expression of the father's face.
Intense.
The knife, which slips from his hand, and the pale throat it was meant to pierce. Such details build up a morbid tension. The fragility of the boy's naked body stretched across the canvas is even moving, and the coarse hand held over his face is particularly shocking, because this poulterer's gesture suggests the fear of death.
Yep.
An emotion which cannot itself be painted.
Wow, think about that. I never thought about that before. He said an emotion that can't even be painted correctly, like that fear of death, that fear of the unknown, that fear of what's to come.
An emotion which cannot itself be painted.
Ooh, that's kind of interesting, actually.
Rembrandt didn't shrink from blood-curdling details or tenderness. And his painting technique was so clever that connoisseurs are still trying to figure out how he did it. Here, particles of Rembrandt's paint are being analyzed by gas chromatography in Amsterdam's central laboratory. Such research is needed in order to carry out restoration work. Researchers are finding out more and more about how Rembrandt used paint and binding agents. It's truly fascinating. The search goes on.
It is a good thing that we have the technology that we have to be able to decide what binding agents he even mixed with his paint. Back then, who knows what they could have used, whether they could have had laying around that they could have decided to mix in with their paint, and we're able to see that and recreate it. That's very, very cool.
Much progress has been made in the dating of wood. Panels for paintings were sawed lengthwise from tree trunks. On the sides of the panels, you can see sections of the annual rings. The rings are counted and entered into a computer. The computer calculates when the tree was felled. All sorts of conclusions can then be drawn. Rembrandt didn't treat his panels in any particular way. He bought several at a time in the standard sizes. This Minerva was painted on wood from the same tree as the portrait of this man. So both pieces must at least have passed through Rembrandt's studio. Researchers are also examining canvases. Part of the Dutch Rembrandt research project included measuring on X-rays the thread density of no fewer than 217 of Rembrandt's works. A Herculean task, which yielded a set of sober graphs. Thanks to all the figures amassed, we now know that Rembrandt did not have rolls of linen, but that he bought a few canvases at a time. If two canvases appear to have come from the same roll, the artist must have bought them at the same time.
So cool
We know that
we can
two
determine
famous
all of this.
unidentified portraits, owned by different people for hundreds of years, and here exhibited side by side for once, were painted on canvas from the same roll. So they must have been husband and wife. There's something else that's special about the woman. Nowadays, paintings can be made slightly radioactive with the aid of neutrons. Because of the differences in half-value times, the various layers of paint can be made visible one by one with sensitive photographic paper.
Oh.
This technique has been applied in Germany and in the United States with this portrait of a woman. Now, experts were able to examine the painting layer by layer. This proved that Rembrandt made changes to this canvas as he went along. In the finished painting, we see on the left that the woman is sitting in a chair with a wooden arm. On the right, her hand is resting on a tablecloth. Here, the neutron-activated autoradiography shows that initially there was no tablecloth. so Rembrandt made improvements until the very last moment.
Wow.
But the experts are examining a great deal more. In Amsterdam, the preparation of canvases has been reconstructed to the last detail. We know that the canvases were stretched into wooden frames with rope and sized with a special gluey substance. The procedure has been reconstructed. First, a thick ground of cheap red ochre pigment is laid on to make the canvas stiff and impermeable. A second layer of white lead with some black pigment was applied to make it smooth and less absorbent for oil paint. In a similar manner, the wooden panels were prepared. A mixture of chalk and glue was applied to the sandpapered wood to fill the seams. Onto this came a second yellowish oil-based ground. In this diagram, we see the chalk layer and yellowish filler served as a ground for the painting's preliminary sketch. Rembrandt's technique was to overlap the outlines.
So it's like a
of the
primer?
sketch. For example, if he wanted a red object in front of a green background, he would first paint the green layer, crossing the outlines of the object, and then fill in the red object, carefully following the outline again. To highlight ornaments such as buttons or jewelry, he dabbed in thick blobs of paint with a fine, shiny white line on top. Such a clarifying diagram doesn't actually tell us very much. After all, the secret started with the sketch, the preliminary study. Here again, a model was made in the laboratory in Rembrandt's usual colour, brown. Artists needed these sketches because they didn't stand in front of their easels. They sat in front of them, right on top of their work. So they needed a kind of blueprint of what they were going to paint. A quibbler may remark that Rembrandt did stand in front of his easel once, but others have pointed out that he is not painting here. He is thinking about what he's going to paint. What's more, there are worn-out spots under the easel where the seated artist placed his feet. The moment of thought symbolizes the inventio, the first creative moment.
See, and that's where I fail miserably. I cannot look at a blank. You know what I see when I look at a blank piece of canvas? A blank piece of canvas that will stay a blank piece of canvas. There's no way that I could take anything from my head and print it onto said canvas. It doesn't make... I've tried learning to draw. I've tried learning how to do all of that stuff, and it just doesn't coordinate right. I don't know. You guys got way more talent than me.
By putting together everything he had ever imagined or seen, as well as hundreds of fragments of compositional detail, Rembrandt created the basis for his paintings, the so-called underpainting, or dead color painting. None of Rembrandt's underpaintings has survived, but there are still monochrome paintings which served as preliminary studies, such as this one for an etching, the Concord of the State. Most remarkable of all are the facial expressions of the people in the crowd. No stereotypes, but individuals. Every single one of them has a different expression and character. Each face is a little masterpiece.
It really is. Look at it. Holy crap. The detail.
Rembrandt's underpaintings were often laid on directly in paint. He drew with paint. This was generally considered the most difficult method. The scenes depicted in these monochrome paintings, such as the preaching of St. John the Baptist, betray the hand of a contemplative person. Most of Rembrandt's underpaintings will have been created more freely. When colouring the painting, he worked from background to foreground. That is to say, he started with the sky, the landscape, and the onlookers in the background, and then worked his way forward. He used the same technique for his etchings, as can be seen by comparing the initial and final stages of an etching. When the background was finished, he still had to start on the foreground.
That's nuts.
His paintings came into being in the same way. In this case, we can imagine the sky and rocks came first. Then the horseman in the background, then the angel and the onlookers, then the main character. And lastly, the figure in the foreground, the donkey, painted within the lines which had been temporarily covered by the angel's robe. Once again, Rembrandt surpasses his teacher. Peter Lastman had painted the same scene. An angel appears before the prophet Balaam 3 times, but the prophet doesn't see him. The donkey does see the angel and lies down. Balaam beats the animal and he begins to speak. This is depicted here. In Lastman's painting, the arm with which Balaam strikes is stretched horizontally in front of him. From here, the arm can only move straight down, as you would do closing a window, not a particularly forceful movement. And Balaam's eyes are focused just above the donkey's head, although the beast is talking to him.
The look of terror on his face.
Rembrandt is much more direct. The hand which strikes the beast is at an angle. The lower arm is raised. From this position, the stick can lash down. Rembrandt has an excellent eye for body language. Also, horseman and donkey look each other straight in the eye. Such a painting is full of details which immediately convince the viewer. By looking at these details, and thanks to the laboratory tests on paint and paint layers, of course, we can come closer and closer to the real Rembrandt. The world-famous Night Watch has also been painted from the back to the front. For the characters in the middle ground, Rembrandt consulted a military handbook for the State Army, drawn up by Jacob de Geen. The book shows how gunpowder is placed in a firelock. Rembrandt turned the man 90 degrees. The book shows how a musket should be fired, and this is also depicted in the middle of the Night Watch. As is the blowing out of the gun's powder magazine after a shot has been fired. The main characters appear in the foreground. Lieutenant Reitenberg in his golden outfit, and the commander of the banner, Captain Franz Barning-Koch. Note the perspective of this arrangement. The commander is, of course, standing in the foreground. He is gesturing. Reitenberg's coat was painted first. Later, the shadow of Barning-Koch's gesturing hand was superimposed on the coat.
Wow.
Rembrandt was very daring to have dressed the commander in black, a color which is generally used to, literally, relegate someone to the background. The X-rays show us that the artist made quite a few changes to the Night Watch. For example, the lock on the magazine of the weapon held by the blowing rifleman was initially not visible, as can be seen in the X-ray on the right. On the left, we see how Rembrandt slightly flattened Reitenberg's shoulder in order to be able to show the metal grip.
Oh.
For those who know, it is very obvious, because it hasn't been done very beautifully. But then again, in the 17th century, people said that you could grate nutmeg on Reitenberg's yellow coat. The feeling of depth created in the painting by Barning-Koch's extended hand is fascinating. A similar effect has been created with Reitenberg's lance. Despite the fact that it's painted in a dark tone, it seems almost to stick out three-dimensionally from the painting.
Yeah, it does.
The X-rays show that Rembrandt made 3 versions before finding the best solution. Note the exquisitely subtle ray of golden light behind the lance's blade. In this way, a 3-dimensional effect is created with
Something
iron
so small, just a little white line can create a night and day difference in a picture.
Was Rembrandt an innovator? Not as far as his material goes. nor in the sense that he radically broke with tradition. On the contrary, he was a connoisseur and fanatic collector of the works of other masters. Rembrandt spent a fortune on prints and drawings by and after Michelangelo, Titian, Raphael, Holbein, and Rubens, to name but a few. These were signals from a world of forms and compositions which he tried to emulate. Lucas van Leeuwen's Ecce Homo.
Like, look at this picture. Even just like the windows, the bricks. You can see every little tiny gnat's ass detail. It's amazing. How do you determine where it all goes? How do you see something like this in just in your mind?
For which he paid far too much money. An original print by Albrecht Dürer, The Virgin Mary's Deathbed. And The Angel Departing from the Family of Tobias by Martin van Heemskerk. If Rembrandt was deeply struck by a particular scene, he would imitate it, sometimes even to the minutest detail. This was not considered plagiarism. It was a quotation, a tribute, and a signal. He indicated that he knew these works, and if possible, that he wanted to excel them.
Even the dog looks terrified in Rembrandt's version. Look, right behind the man on all. Like, that's crazy. Like, there's no pets in the other one. Definitely you could see that he took it up a notch as far as the detailing goes, for sure. Like, the whole thing, I think it's great. I think it's awesome that he would do recreations kind of things that he really enjoyed. In a whole new way, though. It's not like he just
Rembrandt
redid them.
recognized Christ's furious posture in Dürer's Christ driving the money changers from the temple as a unique gesture, and he incorporated it in an even stronger composition of publicans fleeing in panic.
Look at the emotion on their faces.
Mantegna's idea to paint a body at right
Goodness.
angles to a panel's plane is an example of an innovation which found its way through the world of European artists. It reappears in Adonis by Goltzius, and later in Rembrandt's Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Damon. Although in many respects Rembrandt was not original, he was considered modern in his early years. In order to understand this, we shall take a look at the way in which the human face was portrayed before his time. For centuries, faces were drawn with distinct lines. From the early 15th century, faces became more plastic. Shadow, color, and light were added. But his contemporaries must have been stunned to see how Rembrandt did it. As in this
Just
portrait,
so
which is now kept
lifelike.
in
It's
the
like a picture.
The light enters from behind, and the eyes are in the shade. It came as a surprise when experts found out earlier this century that this painting had not been made by Rembrandt at all. In 1959, the original painting surfaced at an auction in London. The work is now exhibited in the Rijksmuseum. It is fascinating to compare this refined portrait with the other, which now appears to be quite different.
Very different. Holy crap.
First of all, the three-dimensional effect is much more effective in the original on the left than in the face on the right.
Yes, it is.
This face even looks slightly swollen and seems too close to the frame. And then the hair.
The hair is terrible on the one.
On the left, an endless variation of fine lines, which gives life to the tousled hair. The copy on the right has monotonous curls bending to the right or left. We no longer see the hair, but mere scratches. The copy on the right has unmotivated patches of light on the nose and neck and an ashen complexion. Left, we see a fine and carefully applied structure of nose and cheek.
Way, way different. Holy wow.
The copy has a few haphazard spots on the cheek and flat, bland shadows. In the cheek on the left, the anatomy of the facial muscles is very distinct. Light from behind is reflected in the cheek in a very subtle manner. On the right, this is not visible. But the differences become even clearer when we take a look at the painting's background on the X-ray. In the original on the left, the background paint continues under the hair. That's logical because the background was painted first. The outline of the hair still had to be determined. The X-ray of the copy on the right shows that the background stops exactly where the paint of the hair starts. This means that the painter knew in advance how the hair would grow. After all, he had the original.
Interesting.
If we take a closer look at the copy, we see how carelessly, even angrily, shadows have been painted under the nose, between the lips, and under the chin. Once again, the X-ray shows that the background does not carry on under the outline of the neck, but that the tapering paint strokes stop exactly there. That's how an example is copied. The question remains, who would make such a copy?
Someone that wants to go to jail for a very, very long time. Right here is where we are going to cut it off. We will finish up part 2 tomorrow. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure you go show the original poster some love. Go show Star Art some love. We're subscribed. I hope you will too. I'll see you guys tomorrow. And if you like to hit the like button, if you dislike to hit the dislike button, check out one of the videos up here. Subscribe right here if you want to see more content, possibly your content. Till the next one, I'm highly combustible. You guys be happy, healthy, safe. I love you to the moon and back. Peace.